So the topic this morning is emotions, feelings, and emotional intelligence. I'm going to be giving you a number of bottom lines, which is going to be perfect for the male brain. For the female brain, you may need to go back to my website and pick up some additional information. You can go to brain references and you can look up references about emotions and feelings and emotional intelligence. You can go to articles and you can pick up articles about emotions, about emotional intelligence with examples of how it's worked in people's lives. So if you want more information, it's certainly available. There's a scripture that says, wait on the Lord. Wait patiently for him. I'm waiting patiently for my slides. Do we have a problem, Houston? It's coming. So I found out I'm going to be going to the high tea tomorrow afternoon. I didn't know there was a difference between afternoon tea and high tea. We don't even have tea in the United States, except in packets. And I have been told that I am also going to be recounting a few experiences of what happened to me when I was a preacher's kid. So that's going to be interesting, for me anyway, to remember those. All right, Rena, please tell me what's happening. I need information. 2 more minutes? Can I say something? Oh, no, I'm speechless. Okay, here's a metaphor for emotions. This will save me time when we do get it up and running. When I was being driven from Coffs Harbor Airport here last Friday by David Stoychich. Boy, I hope I said that right. We passed several places where we saw orange highway cones and orange flags. When you're driving along the highway and you see something like that, what does it tell you? What do you know for sure when you see that? The only thing you know for sure is that there are orange cones and orange highway flags. There we go. Brilliant. Thank you. I told you it takes a village to do anything. What have you learned in the past that is likely to be happening when you see those orange cones and flags? There's something going on up ahead that's different, that you're going to need to pay attention to and probably take some action around. And that may mean you need to slow down, it may mean that you need to take an alternate road, and so on. Think of those as emotions. Emotions were designed to connect your subconscious with your conscious mind. You remember yesterday we talked about the fact that the brain can take in 10 million bits of sensory data per second, far more than you could begin to become aware of. And then when the brain perceives that it needs to give you information about something it's taken in, it will alert you through an emotion. So people say, boy, I wish I could get rid of emotions. I don't think so. What we do with them and how we misinterpret them or don't pick them up at all or mismanage them is the problem. So when I walked onto campus Friday, I did not have an orange highway cone under my arm waving an orange flag. They're way back there on the highway. They just got my attention. People mistake emotions. They pick them up, hang on to them, and run with them. No, you just get the information. You leave the emotion right where it is. And if you get that, You are light years ahead of most people on this planet, and you can teach that to kids 3 years old. And if you do, it'll change their lives. All right, so hang on to that in the back of your mind. Let's do brain benders, top left. Stretch Lemo, good. Second on the left. Word in a word. Remember, brain doesn't care if it goes forwards or backwards. Trouble is the word. What's in the middle? I'm in trouble, and believe me, we'll talk about that tomorrow afternoon. I was in trouble a lot growing up. Third on the left. Tall order, order up, standing order, central order. Lots of things if you want to take the time. Fourth on the left. What kind? Splitting headache. Good job. Top right. Watch over us. Second on the right. If the last letter was there, the word would be there. So, almost there, not quite there. Any of those phrases would work. Third on the right. I understand. Excellent. And fourth on the right. 3 ties, 3-way tie, multiple ties, lots of things. Good, we did those very quickly. All right, here's another metaphor because the brain learns fastest by metaphor. It doesn't really matter what type of clock you have or watch. It needs an energy source. And of course, some of you are almost as old as I am, and you remember in the late 1800s, we had to wind up all our clocks. Fortunately, you don't have to do that too often because many a night I'd go to bed and forget to wind up my wristwatch and then wake up in the morning and it was dead as a doornail. In the same way, humans are motionless without an energy source. And the primary energy source is emotions. So people who try to stuff them, pretend they don't have them, ignore them, are really missing a huge energy source. If you know how to use them, you just have much more energy. So they give you both information and energy, and you can get what they are telling you without doing anything. You know, some people think if they experience an emotion, they have to tell the whole world about it, and they have to do something about it immediately. No, you don't. You just get the information. And sometimes you do something right now because you now have that information, and sometimes you don't. You say to yourself, oh, well, that's very interesting. Next time I'm in a situation like this, I will do such and such instead. It's all about personal information so that you can live more successfully. I only talk about 4 core emotions, and this is what I call the emotions staircase. There are studies that show that these 4 core emotions can be seen on the face of the fetus during pregnancy, depending on what's happening to the mother and therefore what the fetus is picking up. And so you can see the 4 core emotions are in the middle: joy, anger, fear, and sadness. Euphoria is extreme joy that is meant to occur for a very brief span of time. When people don't understand that, they think that euphoria is the norm, and the brain was not designed to live at euphoria. You cannot maintain euphoria without an addictive process. And because it's so hard on the brain, most hardcore addicts are dead by age 37. So occasionally, you know, when I'm 120 and I've got such a huge birthday cake because it's got to be big to get 120 candles on it, believe me, I'll be briefly euphoric. but it's not going to last. At the bottom, you see apathy. Apathy is not an emotion. Apathy is a condition where people have an overwhelm of emotion. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know what's going on, and they actually become immobile. We often see these individuals who are hospitalized because they're so depressed they can't function. Apathetic. Don't care whether they live or die. And as they begin to heal and start climbing back up the steps to joy, and you cannot skip any steps, if they don't have the right support system, as they begin to climb up those steps and get a little energy, that's when they often become suicidal. Nobody ever kills themselves at apathy. They do not have the energy. But as they begin to climb up the steps, then you have to really work with them and help them, because they still have to work through the issues, and sometimes those can feel fairly overwhelming. So the goal is to live at joy. Spend most of your time at joy, because it is the only emotion that has no negative outcomes when it's maintained over time. All of the other protective emotions, anger, fear, and sadness, will have negative outcomes eventually if you maintain it long enough. So you live at joy, and you just move up and down the staircase as necessary. So quickly, joy tells you everything's going pretty well in life. Yeah, it's up and down, but you got the strategies and the support system to deal with it. Anger arises when your boundaries are being invaded, and gives you energy to set appropriate limits for yourself. Fear is the emotion that arises when you are in danger, and it gives you energy to take protective action to protect you and the people you care about. And sadness is the appropriate emotion to help you grieve a loss. And if you can't get to sadness, you can't grieve a loss. What we often find in large sample studies is that males are socialized to stop at anger, and they're angry about everything, whether it's appropriate or not. So they have a loss in the family and they stop at anger. They're angry because they couldn't prevent it or fix it. That's not going to help them grieve and recover from the loss unless they can get to sadness. What we often find is women are socialized to go straight to sadness, regardless of what happens. And therefore, they don't take care of themselves, because setting appropriate boundaries is what anger is all about. And taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually has to do with being aware of danger. So if they go straight to sadness, they're not going to take good care of themselves. So it is critical to go to the step on the staircase that's appropriate for what's happening in your life right now. Candace Pert, marvelous researcher, was at National Institutes of Health for years. She was the researcher who first identified opiate receptor molecules in the brain, which revolutionized the way we now deal with addictive behaviors. Well, read with me what she is saying about emotions. Out loud. Thank you. You know, here's the bottom line, folks. When I say read with me, it's always out loud. You know, save me from repeating it. It's always out loud. All right, let's go. Out loud. Last time I'm telling you. A specific neuropeptide may be associated with each emotion, so you can only experience one core emotion at a time. Emotions connect the subconscious with the conscious. Now, this has really been extremely helpful to me. A neuropeptide is just a specific type of neurotransmitter that impacts your mood. So here's a visualization, an internal mental picture that may help you as much as it's helped me. Each one of us has a stage in our brain. I don't know what yours looks like. You may not even have looked up there to realize you have one, but you do. My stage cost probably $1 billion to create, because when it happens in your mind, cost is no constraint. So I've got solid gold everywhere. I've got Corinthian pillars. I've got Carrara marble. It is really full-time great. I am on that stage my entire life. Until I die, I am on my stage. Until you die, you are on your stage. There are wings at each side, and that's where the actors wait to come on stage. You have 4 actors. What are they? Joy, anger, fear, sadness. Brilliant. Dress them up so you recognize them quickly. So although you can't see the actor who is on stage with me right now, I can, and it's definitely Joy. I didn't even downshift when we couldn't find my slides, which 10 years ago I probably would have downshifted and then couldn't even remember what I'm supposed to tell you. So it's a learning experience. So Joy is on the stage with me right now. Everything's going fairly well, and if there is a glitch, I know that I've got the village and the strategies to deal with it, so no point getting upset. It is not going to help the problem. Let's say, however, that something happened that put me in danger. Fear would come barreling out of the side room, send Joy off, and be right here with me to help me take appropriate action. Now, fear is a very, very valuable actor, but I only want fear here until I get this thing resolved, because I'm healthier and there's no negative consequences when Joy is out here. So the minute I've dealt with this, I send fear back to the wings and Joy comes back. Do you see how that works? So you can only have one other actor on the stage at a time with you, although they may be running back and forth, you know, racing each other to the wings. But you can only have one at a time. So remember that and learn to quickly identify who's up here with you. Now, here's relatively new research that was published in the Lancet Neurology in England. And that is, emotions and feelings are mediated by 2 different systems in the brain. Who knew? So, read the second paragraph with me. When an emotion arises, your brain tries to make sense of the physiological changes in your body and what the emotion is trying to tell you, and then creates your feelings based on its subjective interpretation. Okay, did you get that? What happens in your body when you're in the grip of a strong emotion? What changes? Oh, your heart rate, your breathing rate, you know, you might get butterflies in your stomach, you might break out in a sweat. The body changes based on the emotion. Your brain gets that and it goes, oh my goodness, something just changed here. Now I wonder what that means. And the brain decides what it means and it creates a feeling. If you get that, you understand that you are not responsible for every emotion that arises unless you stayed up till midnight and watched a scary movie and now you're vibrating in fear. You're totally responsible for the feelings you hang on to because your brain creates them. Now, having said that, there are sometimes glitches in neuropeptides, and different brains need sometimes chemical assistance with mood. But in general, that's the bottom line. Not responsible for every emotion that arises. You are responsible for the feelings you hang on to. So if you get this really horrible feeling, you ask yourself, my brain evidently interprets something that just happened like it's Armageddon. Let's take a look at that, because maybe I really don't want to keep feeling like this. To change the way you feel, you must change the way you think, because feelings always follow thoughts. So here's just a fast little review. There's a cutaway of the brain. Again, you can see those 3 layers. Emotional impulses arise in that middle second layer. They'll arise in every cell in your body, but they seem to be triggered out of that middle layer. Up here behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain helps to do several things. Moderate how you express emotion. Oh, we certainly need that piece of assistance. And it helps interpret those emotional signals into feelings, and you can train your brain to do that more accurately. So read the 3rd paragraph with me, because I want this in long-term memory for you. Feelings always follow thoughts. To change the way you feel, change the way you think. Good job. Now, it's so simple. It'll take a little work, but it's very simple. Now we come to what we call EQ, Emotional Intelligence Quotient. And EQ is very different from emotions and feelings per se. They're not the same, although emotional intelligence involves a skill of managing emotions and feelings in a way that just helps you be far more successful. Read with me. It is very important to understand that emotional intelligence is not the opposite of intelligence. It is not the triumph of heart over head. It is the unique intersection of both. Because sometimes people say, oh, you know, I want to be very rational about this. And somebody will say, you know, I want to be very empathetic about this. Okay, fine. It's a unique combination of both of them to be truly emotionally intelligent. Here's the emotional intelligence continuum. You can see high, average, and low. And what that means is that you can look at a behavior and you can actually plot it on that continuum based on what kind of outcome that behavior triggered. Was it a positive outcome or a negative outcome? Here's my definition of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence involves the ability to know what feels good, what feels bad, and how to get from bad to good in a way that results in positive outcomes. Most people know when they feel bad. Most people know when they feel good. The problem is that some people try to get from bad to good in a nanosecond. They get involved with an addictive behavior. They will always eventually have negative outcomes. So moderating your brain with addictive behaviors to feel good is really unhelpful in the long term. Here's the success quotient formula. IQ plus EQ equals SQ. They both contribute to success, but here's what researchers now say, that your IQ, whatever it is, and I don't care how high it is, probably contributes 20% or less to how successful you are. Your level of EQ is worth at least 80% of your success. So I'm always working on my IQ. You know, I'll get some SAT tests and periodically do them to increase my IQ. You can raise your IQ from 5 to 30 points, depending on where it is when you start, if you want to work on it. It's not a completely static number. But I spend most of my time on EQ because the top performers in life, which is my goal, use both of them in harmony. Here's the sad news from organizational business. Successful managers tend to have really high EQ levels. Less successful managers often have very high IQs, but very low EQ. And you all know people who are really brilliant in terms of IQ, but my goodness, they're just, you know, spreading garbage everywhere they go because their EQ is so low and they have no idea how to deal with their emotions and feelings. EQ is critical, it's essential, because there's such a huge difference between people who have high levels of EQ versus people who have low levels of EQ. I've got a couple of slides showing you examples of behaviors, characteristics that we often see in people with high levels of EQ versus low levels of EQ. So look at those two lists. If you're an employer, who do you want to hire? People with high levels of EQ, because they're going to be much more productive in the workplace and not create a lot of chaos with their other employees and so on and so forth. So here's the second list. Now, personalize this. If you're looking for somebody with whom to partner, who do you want to partner with? Someone with high levels of EQ or low levels? Well, some of you don't know. Who do you want to partner with? High levels of EQ. Now, here's the problem. Water seeks its own level. Have you heard that term? EQ seeks its own level. I had a woman come to me the other day whining. I told you what whining was. She's whining to me about her partner and listing all of the characteristics that are bothering her about her partner. And I was gracious. I listened for a few minutes, and finally I said, stop. You're describing to me a person who has low EQ. Well, she said, I didn't have a label, but that sounds right to me. And I said, here's the deal. You partnered with him. Did anybody hold a gun to your head when you married him? No. Okay, fine. Then you've got similar levels of EQ. Oh, she said, I couldn't. I said, well, some of the characteristics may be different, but that's the research. Well, she says, what do I do? I said, you start raising your own EQ. Doesn't mean you won't notice, but you might role model, and things might change a little bit. Young man came to me and said, I can't find a partner that's worthy of me. And I said to myself, well, we could talk about that for a while. And so I said to him, I wonder how high your EQ is. He goes, what's that? And I said, you and I need to chat. You need to raise your EQ, and then you will be attractive to and attracted by people with high levels of EQ, and you just might deserve each other then. But at this level, it's not going to be pretty. One of the biggest reasons that I believe that we need to work on our EQ, and from a spiritual ethic, the process of sanctification, to me, is just developing high levels of EQ. I mean, you can look at it any way you want. Conflict happens everywhere. It is always going to happen. There are always going to be people on this planet who never raise their EQ. However, if yours is higher and other people around you are working on theirs, what's going to happen is you minimize conflict. To me, that is just worth everything. So conflict is everywhere, at home, at church, in the workplace. But if you can raise the levels of EQ, you minimize the amount of conflict. Look at that third bullet. Studies from 2006. I haven't found a more recent study, although Dr. Singh of India is working on an EQ assessment, 54 questions, something like that, that he hopes will be approved for use in organizations when they hire new employees. So that when an employee comes and fills out an application, they'll also fill out an EQ assessment, so that everything being equal, who's the organization going to hire? The person with the highest level of EQ. Absolutely, because it's going to minimize conflict. So here's the research in 2006. Managers spend 18% of their time managing employee conflicts. When you Look at those employee conflicts. Every single issue that's been studied represents low EQ. So if you can get people in your organization who have high levels of EQ, maybe your managers could actually get back to the business of running the company instead of getting paid almost a fifth of their salary, dealing with conflicts that could be avoided if employees had high levels of EQ. How many of you are familiar with the marshmallow study? A couple of you, all right. Last century, and I do love saying that, in the last century, a researcher at Stanford, Walter Mischel, decided that he would study the ability of young children to defer gratification. It's called the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. And you can actually still go to YouTube right now because it's a longitudinal study. And you can watch little clips of these children in this experiment. So this is basically what happened. He started out with 653 4-year-olds. And he says to them, I'm going to give each one of you a marshmallow. You don't have to do anything to get the marshmallow. You're going to get the marshmallow. But here's the deal. I got to leave the room for a few minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. If you wait to eat the marshmallow till I come back to the room, guess what? You get 2 marshmallows. You don't have to wait, but if you want the second marshmallow, you need to wait. And then they had graduate students observing what happened to the kids, and I could spend the whole morning telling you what different kids did. It was amazing. One little boy went over in the corner, lay down, cradled his marshmallow close to him, and went sound asleep. And when Walter came back, he woke up, grabbed his marshmallow, showed Walter his marshmallow, and got his second marshmallow. Of course, some of the kids had their marshmallows crammed in their mouth before Walter had finished passing them out and left the room. And some of those kids at age 4 then began to go around exhibiting bullying behaviors, trying to get other kids to give them their marshmallow. Bullying behaviors are learned. They also may represent cellular memory, so pay attention to that. There was a little girl who said, there was one little boy that I just adored. Freckles, red hair standing up at all angles. And he's standing there looking at his marshmallow. Every once in a while, he took a deep breath. Sometimes he licked it. Okay, he waited a few minutes, but not very long. I mean, it's practically already in his mouth. So there was one little girl who said to the other kids, gather round, put your marshmallow behind your back. Well, duh. Out of sight is somewhat out of mind. And I'll tell you stories. We're all getting a second marshmallow. And there was a group of little boys who, of course, are more active, and they decided that they were going to create an army. And here they are, hup, 1, 2, 3, marching around the whole time so they can get a second marshmallow. Fascinating to watch the way the kids responded. So when Walter came back, almost 1/3 of the kids in this experiment got a second marshmallow. 2/3 did not. 14 years later, they did the first big interventional evaluation of as many of these children as they could find. And there was a statistically significant difference between kids and their lives now who'd gotten the second marshmallow versus those who had not. And the thing that stood out to me was this. Any child who had won a second marshmallow had averaged 200 points higher on their SAT results. That's huge. It's huge. That means they've got more likely choice of the university they want to go to. Instead of getting loans, they probably can get grants and scholarships. It's huge. So at the end of that first 14 years, this was the research conclusion. Read with me. The quality of self-control at age 4, defined as the capacity to delay gratification as one single skill, is twice as powerful a predictor of later success in life as compared to the person's IQ. And subsequent studies have found other factors, so that now researchers are pretty confident in saying, 80% of your success in life is due to your level of EQ. So here are 8 common behaviors that people exhibit when they have high levels of EQ. Now, nobody gets it flawless all the time, but the sky's the limit for EQ. You no longer come up to a ceiling eventually as you do with IQ. I mean, you can raise it as long as you want to work on it, and I'll certainly be working on it my whole life. Because my parents didn't know anything about EQ. My dad was beaten every day of his life till he ran away from home at age 14. My mother was left in an orphanage when she was 5. Children can't teach children. So they didn't know anything about EQ. They couldn't teach me EQ. They did their best with what they knew at the time. So when I really began to get this information, I took a look at the information and the type of behaviors that I exhibited, and I said, oh my goodness, I got to raise my EQ. It goes quickly when you start working on it. So first, able to identify, accurately label, assess the level of intensity, and express emotions appropriately. Can you see that it is not the emotion, it is not the feeling, but it is the skill to use them appropriately. Secondly, able to recognize what the emotion's trying to tell you. It's usually only trying to tell you one of 4 things. Everything's going well, your boundaries have just been invaded, you're in danger, or you've experienced a loss. How basic is that? 3, able to delay gratification and exhibit good impulse control. If you cannot do that, you can't do much of anything. To learn to play the piano, organ, vibroharp, ukulele, whatever else I learned, I had to delay some gratification. I had to be practicing sometimes when other kids were doing other things. And I'm very glad my parents gave me those experiences. 4, able to articulate the difference between recognizing and identifying a specific emotion and whether or not you're going to take any action on it right now. Or are you just going to get the information and do something about it later? Sometimes you do something about it right now. Sometimes I get up and leave the environment. But sometimes I just get the information for later. Listen, read and interpret social cues, and are able to understand the perspective of others, whether or not there's any agreement. EQ is not about agreeing. EQ is about saying, this is my perspective, listening to your perspective. Sometimes I change my perspective based on what I hear. Sometimes I don't. I'm so comfortable saying, thank you for your brain's opinion. Mine's slightly different. End of discussion. I have no need to try to make you agree with my opinion, and I certainly have no need to agree with yours. It's just an exchange. 6, exhibit effective verbal and nonverbal skills along with empathy and compassion. I sometimes see parents who are very empathetic and they cannot get the job done. They let their kids eat things that damage the brain. They let their kids lose sleep, stay up late at night watching television, playing video games. That is not getting the job done. Getting the job done is saying, yes, I realize that you would like to stay up and play more games. You may play more games tomorrow. Go to bed now. End of discussion. Able to manage your own feelings and moods effectively, or seek help when you need it. Some people are just terrified of seeking help. They think if I have to ask for help about something, there's something wrong with me. Well, grow up. There is something wrong with every one of us. And I'm perfectly willing to seek it. What if I couldn't have gone to a surgeon to seek help with my osteoarthritic hips? Now, people would say that is really ridiculously dumb. Yeah, well, there are many arenas in which I might need help. Seek it when you need it. Be really careful who you go to, but get it. Able to handle relationships effectively. Sometimes I think this should be number 1 instead of number 8, although they don't go in any particular order. Minimizing any tendency to take things personally, to overreact, or to jump to conclusions. Okay, thinking back to my life as a preacher's kid, the people who exhausted my father were often ones who were either jumping to conclusions, overreacting, or taking something personally. So this is where I started. I said, okay, Arlene, when's the last time you did one of those 3 things? Pull that up in memory. I didn't have to go back too far. And as I pulled that DVD up in my brain and looked at the situation and what happened and when my behavior started going south, I'd stop the DVD metaphorically, back it up, and I would be my own videographer and retape that video, seeing myself acting, behaving in the way I wanted to behave. And you do that a few times, and you have a much increased risk of doing the new behavior compared to the old behavior. Now, over time, decades, questions arose about the marshmallow study. And people said, I wonder what made the difference in the almost 1/3 of the kids who got the second marshmallow and the 2/3 of the kids who didn't. What was it? Was it the family? Was it the child themselves? Was it parents or grandparents that could teach them to delay gratification? What was it? And so the University of Rochester in New York, 2012, crafted a new experiment. They were going to do the marshmallow test again, but first they were going to do what was called a reliability pretest. So they took a bunch of kids and they divided them into 2 separate groups to start with. And they told each group that here is a little styrofoam object, and we're going to give you supplies so you can decorate this, and then we'll award prizes. So for the first group, the tester came in and said, ooh, you've only got 1 little sticker each and a few broken crayons. You know, if you can wait a few minutes, and this time it wasn't 15, it was like 2.5. If you can wait a few minutes, I'll go get you a bunch of stickers and brand new crayons, and then you can do a really good job of decorating. Other tester went to group number 2 and said the very same thing. So what happened? Tester comes back to one group and says, you know, couldn't find any stickers, couldn't find any new crayons. I know I promised you I'd give you some, but couldn't find any. You're just going to have to do the best you can with what you got. The other group, the tester came back with lots of stickers and lots of beautiful new crayons. And they finished their project. And then they did the marshmallow test. And what they found was that there was a significant difference in the numbers of children who could delay gratification based on the fact of whether they had been in group 1 or group 2. And what did they find? They found that in group 1, with the unreliable tester, I'm going to go get you stickers and crayons, you just wait. And then they didn't come through with what they had promised. Only 7.1% of those children waited for the second marshmallow. How many waited in the original experiment? Almost 1/3. Group 2 where the tester had been reliable and said, I'm going to bring you back stickers and crayons, and did, 64.3% of those children waited and got the second marshmallow. When I read this, I got chills down my spine. Because those of us who believe in a Christian ethic and believe in the importance of deferring short-term rewards that are less than stellar and will negatively impact our health so that we can live longer and be more productive and join a higher power eventually, whether or not that happens in a large percentage is whether or not we have been reliable to our children. Because when parents overpromise and then don't come through, or when they promise things that they cannot deliver, and then, of course, do not deliver, the children develop some sense that nothing is safe. Their parents and caregivers are unreliable, and that's frightening. Not only does it sometimes downshift the child, but children are very sensitive to uncertainty. So when they live in an environment that is unreliable, when they cannot trust, they'll say something like, you know, I'm not gonna worry about then. Then may never come. And if it does, whatever was promised might not be there anyway, so I'm gonna do it right now. One of the biggest favors you can do for your child is to be trustworthy. And in the Christian ethic, that's the whole thing about a relationship with a higher power who is trustworthy. And if you cannot pass that on to your children, then they will have a higher risk of being unsuccessful in life, because you must be able to delay gratification to be successful. So here was the conclusions for the 2012 Rochester, New York research project. So read with me. Performance on delay of gratification tasks can be strongly influenced by an implicit, rational decision-making process based on the child's perception of environment reliability, which is at least comparable in influence to their capacity for self-control. Strategic reasoning plus self-control may have a causal relationship to outcomes later in life. So basically what that says is some kids, based on their innate brain function, probably have a little edge towards self-control. But nobody has an edge on perceiving trust and reliability. So you take that and add that to the child's learned process, and you can start teaching children self-control, to defer gratification. If you can defer it yourself, but it doesn't matter much what you say, your kids are going to watch how you deal with that. So, are you reliable? And that is a hard question. I have spent much of my life dealing with adolescents who are in a home or in a youth authority because they've got problems. And not only, as I review the histories of those children, do I find that in most cases their caregivers were unreliable. You know, they promised they would feed them. You know, that's a basic right of a child to have enough to eat. But one or both parents were involved with an addictive process to make them feel good right now, and so they spent their paycheck on the way home for addictive substances, and there's no food for the kids. Now, what kind of message does that provide to a child in terms of, are they even valuable enough to be fed? So your child's, my child's ability to defer short-term gratification for a bigger, better, long-term reward will depend certainly on, in part, on how, as the child grows, he or she is willing to embrace this concept, because it's not always easy to defer gratification. You know, the other day on the campus, somebody asked me if I wanted to do something with them, and I said, yes, I do. However, I've got to defer that, because I have got to be sure that I have my next set of slides done. You probably don't know the difference, but I know the difference. And if I was unable to defer that, I would be giving you less than I am capable of giving you. And you're worth more than that. Your children are worth more than that. But it starts with you. So they perceive whether or not you're reliable. I think the implications are staggering. In homes, in schools, probably in churches, everywhere. And it goes back to emotional intelligence. Only promise what is good for your child and what you know you can pull off. It's better not to promise anything if you can't pull it off. But teaching trust means that you get some promises and that they are fulfilled. So when my boys wanted to go to Disneyland, because all their little friends in school were going to Disneyland, and Disneyland is like a 9-hour drive from where we lived, what we said to them was, I think Disneyland would be a great idea. We'll work on that. We'll see how we can arrange that. And as soon as we have it figured out, we'll let you know. Okay, it took us 2.5 years to get there. But the boys didn't seem too upset about that. In fact, one day they had a bunch of little friends over, and they said, are you guys going to Disneyland? And the middle one said, you know, I believe we're going to, but my folks are working on it. How much better, I don't know how we managed to pull off a few things appropriately, because believe me, we were not raised that way. How much better than to say, sure, we'll go to Disneyland, you know, maybe we can go next summer. All right, they hear maybe we can go next summer as what? We're going next summer. And if next summer it's not possible to pull that off, what's the message? You're unreliable, and they're not worth the trip. So we really need to be careful what we promise. Promise only what you know you can deliver. And in order to teach them, start delivering little things. Tell them, tomorrow, as long as it doesn't rain, we'll go to the park. And if it rains, we'll go to the library instead. You know you're going to take them one place or the other anyway. But you're teaching them reliability. You're teaching them to trust that you'll follow through on what you say. Individuals who don't know that and get married, who don't trust each other, are in a world of hurt. A world of hurt. So, emotional intelligence, one of the most amazing concepts that I've ever had the good fortune to learn about. Let's read the last slide together. Emotional intelligence is a required course for success in every aspect of life. But the homework is challenging, and exams are often tough to pass, so many drop out. You can raise your EQ and role model for others. You can become reliable and trustworthy. It starts with choice. It follows with little by little doing things that you follow through on, which is good for you And it's good for your children and your grandchildren and cellular memory and your great-grandchildren, and probably your little dog is even happier. Thank you.